finally. A little bit of resting.
Ah! What? What the hell?
Hi.
I wasn't expecting you until within an hour. But since you're here, we can get started. Please, take a seat.
Wait, where I am?
Well, this is your American
Are
dream.
you kidding me?
Yeah, you have to. This doesn't make sense.
Well,
lots of things which doesn't make sense happens every day. And here you are. How do I get out of here? You won't be able until we finish something.
What thing?
I'm gonna tell you about the year 1989.
Why would I be interested in that?
That's a good question. Anyway, let me start so you can sooner.
Please.
Okay, so we will start actually hard. Well, it happened on the night of January the 16th, 1989, the anniversary of the birth of Martin Luther King Jr. Days later, Miami would host the Super Bowl, a major event for a resort town that was under national attention. Clement Lloyd, 23, a car wash shop manager, was speeding his motorcycle through the streets of our town. His passenger was Anne Blanchard, 24, an unemployed construction worker. After activating the lights and the steering of his patrol car, a Miami policeman tried to make them stop, but what Lloyd did was accelerate down Northwest 3rd Avenue in the direction of William Lozano, who happened to be stopped on the side of the street, writing a citizen report. Lozano fired a shot. The projectile hit Lloyd in the head. The motorcycle crashed into a car, throwing Blanchard against the pavement. They both died. When investigators and local officials arrived at the scene, Overtown residents greeted them with fury, throwing bottles and rocks at them. In just a few hours, 270 people were arrested, several supermarkets and furniture stores looted, and dozens of cars set on fire. The riots spread Tuesday night from Overtown to two other neighborhoods, one of them the Post Coconut Grove, and police closed 135 blocks. Nonetheless, Miami was a dead city, with the population demoralized in their homes, and the most offices attached to the riot zone closed early so that employees could leave before dark. Even the man was stoned when he came to ask for count and had to leave the area. Prosecutors directly brought 2 counts of wrongful death with a deadly weapon against Lozano. The trial was set to start in November, just 10 months after the incident. Despite requests from the defense, State Circuit Judge Joseph Farina refused to allow the trial to take place outside of Miami. Every day, jurors entered at Miami-Dade courthouse protected by heavily armed officers in the stairwells and hallways and a sniper on the roof. The jury panicked that a not guilty verdict could set the city on fire again. At the trial, 5 witnesses told the jury that Lozano pointed his gun at Lloyd. In a hesitant statement, Lozano took the stand to speak in his own defense. He insisted on stating that he stopped in the street to stop Lloyd, and that he only fired after the motorcycle hit him without giving him time to think twice. Lozano's account worked against him. Forensic evidence was crucial. The trajectory of the bullet contradicted what Lozano said, who declared that he had shot from the waist. The entire trial lasted 13 tense days. After 8 hours and 13 minutes of deliberations, the 6-person jury found Lozano guilty on all charges. Do not celebrate yet.
Why?
Years later, in year 1991, the 3rd District Court of Appeals changed the guilty verdict against Lozano. Farina, it was determined, was wrong in not moving the trial out of the county amid fear of violence. The 1993 retrial took place in Orlando. The jury acquitted Lozano.
No. That's not true.
Justice does not believe in what's true, but in what seems like a better story. Fortunately, not everything is so bad.
Is there anything worse?
Yeah, but not talking about that now. Instead, something not so unfortunate.
Okay, do your thing.
On January 20th, George Bush became the 41st US president. But let's talk a little about this man.
How did you...
He participated in World War II as the youngest naval aviator. He was a congressman from 1967 to 1971. He was appointed ambassador to the United Nations from 1971 to 1973 by Nixon. He became the chairman of the Republican National Committee from 1973 to 1974 amid the Watergate scandal, when the popularity of Nixon and the Republican Party plucked. He even served as director of the CIA between January 1976 and January 1977, during which time he actively supported Operation Condor and the right-wing military dictatorships in Latin America. Operation Condor? A campaign of political repression and state terrorism backed by the United States that included intelligence operations and assassination of right-wing opponents in South America. In October 1987, Bush officially entered the presidential race. He would ultimately win the election to Democrat Michael Dukakis in a campaign described as one of the dirtiest to date, in which Bush took advantage of his rival's firm opposition to capital punishment to attack him. Bush inaugurated his presidency on January 20, 1989, in the middle of the decomposition of the Soviet bloc, presenting himself as the leader of an expanding free world. During his tenure, the fall of the Berlin Wall and the disintegration of the Soviet Union will take place. George Bush finally passed away on November 13, 2018 at his home in Houston. The body of the president was taken to a rotunda of the Capitol for the state funeral. The funeral was attended, among others, by President Trump and his wife Melania, despite the bad relations with the Bush family, in addition to his son George Bush, also president. On December 5th, his body was transferred to the Washington National Cathedral, the last state funeral held before his burial on December 6th in Texas. Do you like blood? It doesn't scare or repel me. Why? And do you have a strong stomach? Again, most of the things I have seen have cost me nothing. Perfect, because I'm going to introduce you to a serial killer of women. What? Ted Bundy was an American serial killer. After more than 9 decades denying it, he confessed 36 homicides of American women that he committed in 7 states between 1974 and 1978. The actual number of victims is unknown. 36 murders were proven to him. He was sentenced to death in the electric chair. Bundy held a marathon of interviews and confessions during his final days, although he was never willing to admit everything, especially the murders of some of the younger victims. On his last day, he called his mother and refused his last meal. He was electrocuted on January 24, 1989, and pronounced dead at 7:16 a.m. He was 42 years old. Why was he free for so long? He got several sentencing delays thanks to his charms. How? He was a really good and trained psychopath, as well as magnificent student, so he just needed a bit of rehearsal. Enough that for now. Let's go for something a little more technical, thanks. On February 14th, the first of the 24 satellites that make up the GPS system was located. The Block 2 satellites were the first large-scale operational GPS satellites designed to provide 14 days of operation without any contact with the control segment. The main contractor was Rockwell International, which built an SBN-12 rating vehicle after an amendment to the Block 1 contract. In 1983, the company was awarded an additional contract to build 28 Block 2 2A satellites. The Block 2 spacecraft were stabilized on 3 axes, pointed to the ground by reaction wheels. What it does? It allows the machine to rotate to make corrections without wasting fuel. I'm sorry because I want to talk about someone who's dead again. It's supposed to be work, so go on. You will surely wonder who this man is. Among many other things, yeah. Well, he's the real James Bond. He died on February 14th. He wasn't inspired or anything like that, but he was an expert ornithologist on Caribbean birds. Ian Fleming would say verbatim, "It struck me that this brief, unromantic, Anglo-Saxon and yet very masculine name was just what I needed, and so a second James Bond was born." In addition, in the 20th James Bond film, Die Another Day, he examines the birds of the West Indies book, the real James Bond book, and pretends to be an ornithologist. A good wink? And now I will tell you about a tragedy of those that if you were to be in that place, it would surely take your heart to the size of an atom. Although not so much, since the next one may be even worse. Oh god, let me happen live those years. It was on Friday the 24th, early morning. United Airlines Flight 811 was a regularly scheduled flight between Los Angeles and Sydney, with stopovers in Honolulu and Oakland. In command is the experienced Captain David Cronin, 59 years old, with more than 28,000 hours of flying accumulated during his pilot career by that time. This is the penultimate shuttle flight of Captain Cronin, who was about to retire from commercial aviation. Accompanied by First Officer and Co-Pilot Gregory Slater, 48, with 14,500 flight hours of experience, and 46-year-old flight engineer Randall Thomas, who has accumulated 20,000 flight hours in his career. The aircraft was an 18-year-old Boeing 747 jumbo jet, registered N4713U. On board are 337 passengers and 18 crew members. Now let's start talking about the accident. Imagine that you are a film camera. At 1:52 hours, Flight 811 takes off. After 16 minutes in the air, the plane is flying over the Pacific Ocean at almost 22,000 feet, 6.7 kilometers, and continues to climb. The pilots notice heavy rainfall on their course with their meteorological radar, so they plan to make a small deviation to avoid it, and keep the passenger seatbelt signal activated, preventing possible turbulence. Many of the passengers are asleep, but suddenly their dreams are interrupted. The pilots began to receive the signal that they were losing number 3 engine, without knowing why. The plane had suffered an explosive decompression. It means that decompression is too fast to release air safely from the lungs, typically in less than 0.1 to 0.5 seconds, so the risk of lung trauma is very high. Explosive forces can be compared to the detonation of a bomb. Well, they decided to make an emergency descent, since they still didn't know what had happened. They also maintained contact with the Honolulu air traffic controller throughout the incident. As the protocol stated, the oxygen masks had to be done, but it noted that none worked, so the pilots had to descend rapidly to 10,000 feet, 3,048 meters, to avoid fainting from hypoxia. And they initiated a left turn to try to return to the Honolulu airport. They decide to turn off engine 3. Captain orders the engineer to contact the chief purser to prepare the passengers for the emergency descent, but the intercom doesn't work. The decompression affected the right side of the plane. Engine number 4 begins to fail as well. The pilots begin to unload fuel as the plane is too heavy to land and could have a failed landing with fatal consequences. Engine 4's situation is getting worse. If they turn it off, they will lose momentum and risk stalling. They were still 60 miles, 96.5 kilometers, from the nearest airport. They finally reach an altitude where the earth is breathable, and the depressurization alarm stopped sounding. The engineer decided to go down to find out what was happening in the passenger cabin, but when he arrived, he doesn't believe what he sees. There was a huge hole in the fuselage that extended from the cargo area to the second floor windows of the plane, and the ground around the hole had been ripped away, losing several passengers. He thought it was a bomb and returned to comment the situation to the pilots. The instruments now show that engine 4 is about to catch fire completely, so they have to turn it off. If they were flying at less than 240 knots, or 144 km per hour, the plane would stall. In the absence of 2 engines, they had little room for error to maneuver, and to top it off, the flaps didn't work at all, which translates into greater speed when landing. They finally approached the airport and the pilots prepared for the difficult landing. Lacking full flight control and with only 2 thrust reversers, pilots feared running off the runway when landing. They touched down. The landing gear halts and the reversers activate, stopping the plane a few meters from the end of the runway. 9 passengers died who were ejected along with their seats during the explosive decompression falling into the Pacific Ocean, some of which would be sucked by engines 3 and 4 along with pieces of the fuselage, thus causing the breakdown and fires of these 2 engines. None of the bodies of the ejected passengers were found. Having initiated investigations, they realized that the fault came from the loading hatch. Its electric lock could suffer short circuits that would reopen it. It turns out that the hatch was opened during the flight with such force that it hit the upper part of the fuselage, detaching and impacting engines 3 and 4. The NTSB issued a series of communiques making it mandatory that all the doors open inwards and not towards outside on all commercial aircraft. After the manufacturers followed the recommendations, no more accidents or incidents occurred due to a cargo hatch on commercial flights.
That was amazing!
What? Now I'm the one who doesn't understand anything.
I could see it as if I were right there.
The American dream? March passes faster but in a more catastrophic
What do you
way.
mean with more catastrophic?
I mean an oil spill.
How? When? Where? Why?
Calm down, please. That's why I'm here, to tell you.
Okay, sorry. Go on.
Again, as if you were a camera. The Exxon Valdez was one of the largest supertankers in the world. March was a time of falling sheets of ice from the massive glacier Columbia. The tanker was located at Prince William Sound, Alaska. There are two shipping lanes in Prince William Sound, one for incoming lanes in purple and the other for outgoing in yellow, as you can see. And with the glacier ice reporting in the outgoing lane in white, Captain Hazelwood asked for permission from the Coast Guard to cross over the incoming lane instead. As there weren't any other ships into the system, he was clear to do that, so he could cross the median just like a median in a double highway, and he was supposed to turn and go out in the inbound lane, but he miscalculated. Both lanes were safe for shipping, but the course Hazelwood set to change lanes, unless corrected, had the supertanker heading directly for the massive underwater rocks of Blight Reef, as you can see its trajectory in red. This was happening just prior to midnight, and all this time the ship was moving forward, increasing speed, going fast and going out of the inbound lane. At 11:54 p.m., Captain Hazelwood left the bridge for his cabin. He put the third mate, Greg Cousins, in command. By US Coast Guard rules, Cousins was not qualified to take control in these waters. The ship was set in one course that it needed to be a rudder change, and the order was given by the third mate, but seemingly the change didn't happen. The ship couldn't turn because of the automatic pilot, which had been led on by Captain Hazelwood. The tanker was now steering itself. A loaded ship of the size of the Exxon Valdez takes miles to stop and hundreds of yards to turn, and so when Cousins realized, it was too late. The ship was going at 12 knots across the Million Street, just kept going right up on the rocks. It was that simple. The ship was carrying 53.1 million US gallons, 200 million liters of oil, of which approximately 10.8 million US gallons, 40.8 million liters, were spilled into the Prince William Sound.
How long did it take to decontaminate it?
Most of it a few weeks, but there is still crude oil between the rocks and sands that takes longer than expected to dissolve and continues to kill many species.
So unfortunate.
And now one about sailors.
I hope this will be better.
Then do not expect anything else about this year unless you want to go into depression. On April the 19th, 1989, there was an explosion in the number 2 artillery turret of the battleship USS Iowa of the United States Navy, when it was on maneuvers in the Caribbean next to Puerto Rico. The central gun cockpit explosion killed 47 crew members, injured several of them, and seriously damaged the turret, as you can presume. The first investigation was controversial due to US Navy's investigations concluded that it was intentionally provoked by a suicidal homosexual crew member, Harville, whose relationship had broken up.
Wow, do you mean they were blaming him because of his sexual
Yes,
orientation?
it turned out to be the scapegoat. Obviously, the families of the victims, the media, and some members of Congress were not convinced by the findings and harshly criticized the investigation. Into the revision of the investigation, it was found out that there had been an accident of compacting of the powder bags inside the barrel while it was being loaded, and that compacted envelope could have caused the blast. A subsequent Navy test on the possibility of overcompacting confirming that it could cause an explosion in the pot of the barrel. However, the Navy in disagreement concluded that the causes of the explosion could not be determined. Eventually, the US Navy apologized to Harvey's family and closed the investigation.
Dude, that was actually dirty.
It is what it is into the Bang Bang country. Now please fasten your seatbelt because now a bumpy ride is coming.
How pumpy is it?
As much as an aircraft crash. United Airlines flight.
Ah shit, here we go again. United Airlines again? What is that? Is we still a company?
United Airlines Flight 232 was a regular scheduled flight between Denver and Philadelphia, with a stopover in Chicago on July the 19th. In command is the Captain Alfred Haynes, 57 years old, with more than 29,000 hours of flight accumulated during his pilot career. He is accompanied by First Officer and co-pilot William Rickards, 47, with more than 20,000 flight hours of experience, and 51-year-old flight engineer Jude Lee Devereux, who had accumulated 23,000 flight hours in his career. The aircraft is an 18-year-old McDonnell Douglas DC-10, registered N1819U. On board are 258 passengers and 11 crew members. All of a sudden, engine number 2 explodes and the hydraulic system doesn't work. Rapidly, they cut off fuel to the damaged engine to prevent it from catching fire. The engine explosion had caused a total failure on aircraft controls, and now the heavy plane is drifting and tilting to the right. The pilots managed to stabilize the plane using the throttle levers of the two remaining engines, while declaring the emergency to the air traffic controller while evaluating how and where to land. The Minneapolis air traffic controller suggests them going to the Sioux City Airport in Iowa. They got to line up the aircraft with the landing track, and another idea was given by the controllers, to land on the highway farther east, but the pilots rejected it. Shortly before the emergency landing, the plane veered to the right again, causing the aircraft to crash at high speed and go off the runway. 111 of its 285 passengers and one of its 11 crew members died, most of whom were in the tail. Despite the fatalities, the accident is seen as a good example of proper crew resource management due to the large number of survivors and the way the pilots controlled and attempted to land the aircraft without conventional flight controls. If you look closely, you will be able to appreciate the markings on the ground from the old runways where they landed.
The old ones?
Yep, sometime after the accident, the airport was renovated. But not everything got a bit bad news, although they are news. You understand it. For example, the arrival of the Voyager 2 probe on August 25, 1999, got to discover 6 new satellites in an area close to Neptune. The list was expanded to 8 after the incorporation of the so-called Naiad, Thalassa, Despina, Galatea, Larissa, and Proteus, all of them names referring to aquatic places.
Well, at least the discovery was on.
And now,
Again?
it's not because of me, it's because of you. Hurricane Hugo was a devastating Category 4 hurricane that impacted Puerto Rico, US Virgin Islands, and South Carolina on September 21st, killing more than 50 people. The storm cost billions of dollars in damage, mostly in South Carolina, and to this day it remains among the costliest hurricanes in history. It reached the Caribbean Sea as a Category 4 hurricane, passing over the eastern tip of Puerto Rico. Hugo weakened as he left the warm waters of the Caribbean, but intensified again as he passed over the Gulf Stream. The storm made landfall in South Carolina on the 9th of September 21st as a Category 4 hurricane. Hugo had been forecast to move forward Savannah, Georgia, but unexpectedly veered north toward Charleston, South Carolina. The eye of the hurricane passed just northeast of Charleston. After making landfall, Hugo weakened to a tropical storm as it passed near Charlotte, North Carolina. The storm continued to move north as an extratropical low pressure, passing over the Great Lakes and parts of eastern Canada. It was estimated that the total damages in the Caribbean islands were $3 billion, of which $1 billion corresponds only to Puerto Rico. The greatest devastation was reported in the northern suburbs of Mount Pleasant, Sullivan Island, and Nassau Farms in South Carolina. The last 2 islands were cut off after the bridges were destroyed. Along the coast, Hugo destroyed many houses.
It had to be really bad.
And every year it goes worse. Do you know who was born on September 21st?
Who?
Jason Derulo!
And? Are you gonna tell me anything else?
No,
Why?
because you know,
I'd like to know a little bit about...
he defines himself.
I hate myself.
What have you said?
Nothing.
Okay, and now, guess who was born on October the 1st?
Whoa, what about the rest of September?
Nothing else special happened.
Well, October the 1st, right?
Yep.
I give up.
Brian Larson! Captain
I
Marvel!
presume you won't tell me anything else about her, right?
Exactly! And now, what about October the 4th?
I don't know. Steve Jobs?
Dakota Johnson. Do I need to define her for you, Or do you need another image a little
Oh,
more
no, don't worry.
explicit?
Later.
What?
Later. Sometimes I feel like somebody is watching me.
What's wrong? Huh? Oh, nothing. Well, now another tragedy.
Another one? Really?
Unfortunately, yes. The Loma Prieta earthquake, also known as the World Series earthquake, occurred in the San Francisco Bay Area of California on Tuesday, October 17th at 5:04 p.m. Caused by a landslide on the San Andreas Fault, the earthquake lasted approximately 15 seconds and had magnitude of 7.1 on the Richter scale. As a result of the earthquake, 63 people died in Northern California. 3,700 people were injured, and between 8,000 to 12,000 people were left homeless. The earthquake occurred during warm-up for the third game of the 1989 World Series, which coincidentally featured both Major League Baseball Bay Area teams, the Oakland Athletics and the San Francisco Giants. This earthquake was the first in the United States to be broadcast on live television.
Was it broadcast on live?
Of course, the World Series was being celebrated, I told you. Just a day after the Loma Prieta earthquake, the Galileo mission to Jupiter was launched.
They had no time to waste.
Galileo was an American robotic space probe that studied the planet Jupiter and its moons, as well as several other solar system bodies. Named after the Italian astronomer Galileo Galilei, it consisted of an orbiter and an entry probe. It was delivered into Earth orbit on October 18, 1989, by Space Shuttle Atlantis. Galileo arrived at Jupiter on December 7, 1995, after gravitational assist flybys of Venus and Earth, and became the first spacecraft to orbit Jupiter.
It was quite an achievement.
Talking about achievements, I'm going to introduce you to Foster Ramsey. Norman Foster Ramsey Jr. was an American physicist who was awarded half a 1989 Nobel Prize in Physics for the invention of the separated oscillatory field method, which had important applications in the construction of the atomic clocks. A physics professor at Harvard University for most of his career, Ramsey also held several posts with such government and international agencies as NATO and the United States Atomic Energy Commission. Among his other accomplishments are helping to found the United States Department of Energy's Brookhaven National Laboratory and Fermilab, Fermi National Accelerator Laboratory.
How important was that?
Very briefly, it guarantees an accuracy that is necessary for GPS positioning, synchronization of official clocks, and some scientific research while serving as a very stable sources of electromagnetic radiation. Okay, this one will be quite easy. Who was born on December the 13th?
I told you I have no idea about this year. Well, now a bit more, but I still don't understand why you want me to know.
How so? The mother. She was Taylor Swift.
Okay, so have you finished?
Not yet. There's only one thing left.
Really? Oh, thank God.
Yay, finally, you are a bit excited. I need you to pay attention, because this last day will be decisive.
Okay, now you just got my attention. I'm all ears.
In the 1980s, the Panamanian leader Manuel Noriega, who once supported the United States, was later accused of espionage on behalf of Fidel Castro and of using Panama to traffic drugs to the United States. The fight to remove him from power began with Reagan, when economic sanctions were imposed on the country. This included prohibiting US companies and the government from making investments in Panama and freezing 56 million Panamanian funds in US banks. In May 1989, Panama held democratic elections, in which Guillermo Indara was elected president. The results were later annulled by the Noriega government. In response, Bush sent 2,000 more troops to the country apart from those previously stationed by Reagan, where they began to carry out regular military exercises in Panamanian territory, thus violating previous treaties.
So, as the US was violating international treaties, they would have some sanctions.
United Nations General Assembly condemned the invasion as a flagrant violation of international law, and on December 22nd, a resolution was approved by the Organization of American States, that deplored the invasion and called for the withdrawal of all US troops from Panama. But when someone becomes the US president, he thinks he's the legitimate ruler of the world. So those complaints were ignored. In addition, Bush closed the US embassy and removed the country's ambassador, and sent additional troops to Panama to prepare the way for an upcoming invasion. Noriega aborted an attempted military coup in October and suppressed massive protests in Panama against him. But after a US soldier was shot by Panamanian forces in December 1989, Bush ordered 24,000 soldiers to enter the Central American nation, with the goal of removing Noriega from power. It was the first large-scale US military operation in more than 4 decades that was not related to the Cold War. The escalation of tension between the Southern Command troops established on the banks of the canal and the Panamanian Defense Forces began precisely with the aforementioned incident, in which, according to the US version, 4 officers in civilian clothes were lost and ended up near the Central Barracks, where, in a shootout with Panamanian soldiers, an American lieutenant named Robert Paz was killed, and a Panamanian soldier and 2 civilians were wounded, including an 11-month-old girl. That same night, the same sources indicate that another officer and his wife were threatened by the Panamanian military. Finally, they had the beloved casus belli. And that Tuesday, new large aircraft began landing every 10 minutes, carrying more troops from bases in California, North Carolina, Georgia, Washington, Texas, and Mississippi, making up a contingent of 24,000 troops. Panamanians had the first news of the attack when Channel 8 of the Southern Command Television sent an overprinted message announcing that the troops were in code of invasion. The national television signal was interfered by the Americans, and in a short time only the national station, which became a resistant channel, remained as a source of government information. The bombing was combined massive against the Panamanian military installations and the capital, with a special deployment of bombs and rockets that were aimed at the headquarters where the General Noriega was supposed to be. But he wasn't.
And then, where was Noriega?
Don't be anxious, we will get to that part of the history. In addition to bombing from the air and from Carey Heights, where the Southern Command headquarters was located, the Americans arrived in the capital in armored vehicles and on foot. On the bridge of the Americas, which crosses the canal, there was a violent shooting between the two sides. In the area of the Central Barracks, there were also intense exchanges of fire, although the compound had been evacuated because the Machos del Monte, an elite guerrilla war unit in charge of defending it, remained in the area. Through the national radio, the forces loyal to Noriega urgently summoned the members of the Dignity battalions, armed and army-trained civilians, and every citizen who offered to take up arms. The US embassy was heavily warned by US tanks that unceremoniously drove away press photographers with machine guns pointing at them. Would you like to know about some of the events?
Yes, why not?
Okay. The raid of the Renacer prison was an attack in Gamboa, Panama, by units of the United States Army. During the raid, the US military released the 46 prisoners held in the detention center and killed 5 soldiers of the Panama Defense Forces. By December 1989, the Noriega regime had filled it with political prisoners, many from the failed coup on October 3, 1989. Among the prisoners were several Americans. The Renacer prison was located next to the Panama Canal, approximately half of the isthmus. The capture of the Omar Torrijos Airport was another of the military operations, whose objective was to capture the Panamanian Air Force, which was based at the airport. Operation Acid Gambit was a plan to recover Kurt Moose, an American civilian in Panama reported to be a CIA agent. The Battle of Coco Solo took place at the Coco Solo naval base. The US force attacked the naval base, resulting in the surrender of the Panamanian forces. Operation Nifty Package was a plan designed to capture Panamanian leader Manuel Noriega. When Noriega took refuge in the Apostolic New Center of the Holy See, deafening music and other psychological warfare tactics were used to convince him to go out and surrender. The United States claimed that after 10 days of psychological harassment, the Papal Nuncio, Monsignor Laboa, had threatened to revoke Noriega's sanctuary if he didn't surrender to the United States, although Laboa insisted that he had not threatened to revoke the right of asylum under the charge, but he had used his own previous calibrated psychological campaign to force Noriega out. The mission was controversial, but US forces quickly gained control of the country and Enduara assumed the presidency. Noriega surrendered to the United States and was convicted of imprisonment of extortion and drug trafficking charges in April 1992. President Bush and First Lady Barbara Bush visited Panama in June 1992 to support the new Panamanian government. The visit was marred by protests and involved gunfire and tear gas, forcing Bush to abandon a rally.
Yes, finally it was an insane year.
Well, that's your vision, but if you realize it happens almost every year.
Not so original. So, can I leave now?
Of course, boy. A deal is a deal.
Thank you very much indeed for everything. See you.
When did he learn to...